am making this video to explain to you about our celebration of the Feast of Absalom Jones on February the 8th. The Reverend Absalom Jones is the first African American priest in the Episcopal Church. He was ordained in Philadelphia by the Bishop William White, who was the first bishop of the Episcopal Church of North America. He ordained Absalom Jones in 1805. And what is significant about not only the timing of this is that it's significant in the founding of this country. We're only 31 years after the Revolutionary War, the Declaration of Independence, and so the country is still being founded. It is also significant, and I think this is why it's significant that this is in Black History Month, is that Absalom Jones is ordained during the time when this country is still using enslaved labor as its main economic means of building its wealth. Absalom Jones was born in enslaved labor. His parents were enslaved, and he purchased his freedom through his labor to his owner. He purchased his freedom. He purchased his wife's freedom, and so that when they had children, that their children would be born in freedom. If you were an enslaved woman, you gave birth to children. Your children were born into slavery. So Absalom Jones and his wife Mary wanted to make sure that their children were not born slaves. The wonderful thing about Absalom Jones is that he led the way in this enslaved labor environment. He led the way for African Americans and even European Americans with whom he was affiliated to push past this evil of enslaved labor. And I call it elite evil. It was, and but also because it did not regard the humanity of the enslaved person. Enslaved people were considered chattel. They were considered like anything else on your property that you used to make money. And what Absalom Jones did is that he and others like him in Philadelphia and in Boston and New York and at other places in the United States where there were groups of freed African Americans, what they did is they created a lifestyle, a culture for people to become human beings. And in doing this, he opened this door in the Episcopal Church for the church to expand its recognition of African Americans, whether they were enslaved or freed. He opened the door of the church for this, to the recognition of our humanity to be held up. One of the reasons why the group of Absalom Jones, Richard Allen, who went on to found the African Methodist Episcopal Church, one of the reasons why they decided to take the church that they formed, that became St. Thomas's Church in Philadelphia, of which I am a former member, they raised the money for this Black church and decided to join the Episcopal Church. And one of the reasons why they joined the Episcopal Church is because the Episcopal Church regarded Black people as human beings. It baptized their babies, it married them, it buried them. You can go into the records of some of the oldest Episcopal churches in the oldest cities of this country and find records for the baptism and the funerals and the burial of slaves and freed people. But this is why they chose the Episcopal Church, and I think this says volumes about what they saw in these folks who dominated their lives. So we want to talk about this. We want to hold up this man because he holds up the church in the light of the gospel in ways that it really took the church a long time to live into. But he holds it. He holds the church up, the light on the church. He holds up the gospel, the light of the gospel on the church, and we can see through Absalom Jones and through Bishop White, the gospel coming to life in the early part of this country when this country was enslaved. We see the gospel coming through of loving your neighbor and treating each other. Loving your neighbor is very well seen in Absalom Jones pushing for the recognition of the humanity of African Americans, and the Bishop William White affirming that in the ordination of this African American for an African American church, for sure. This country would be separated racially, legally for a very long time after this, and in many ways we still are, but at this particular time, Bishop White was holding up the affirmation of the African American as a human being, and saying and giving Absalom Jones and others like him the opportunity to push forward. And I think it's important that we hold him up in recognition of the light that he shines on the church. And I also wanted to explain this to you because I think at St. Andrew's, St. Andrew's is just a unique spiritual parish, a welcoming parish, truly welcoming parish, in many, many ways that I don't even think that we're aware of, that I have become aware of, having traveled this diocese. But it's an honor for me to be able to talk about part of our history from an African American perspective here at St. Andrew's, and to share this with you. Next week I'll talk more about the history of Absalom Jones in another video. But I also want to please take note of a website that I have put in the write-up for this in the newsletter that will enable any of you who want to talk to your children about slavery. It's a great website. It's written by a teacher, and I think it gives you the words and the thoughts to explain slavery to your children. So stay tuned for next week. Thanks a lot.